We continue our coverage this afternoon on Senzo Meyiwa with a senior policing and community conflict specialist at the Africa Centre for Security and Intelligence Praxi, Mr. Eldred de Klerk. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. de Klerk, and thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Perhaps let's get straight into this question. There are allegations that police, quote-unquote, failed to connect the dots in this Senzo Meyiwa case, that the late Sam Meyiwa had actually given some sort of evidence and actually pointed out the people who were involved in the murder of Senzo Meyiwa early on, but the fact that police did nothing about this. Just your comments on that, and also if you could just add, how do police decide what leads to follow up on and which to leave?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your viewers. Indeed, look, it's very difficult and it's impossible to place ourselves in the shoes of the police at the time. A lot depends on what the police believe to be evidence that is good enough to convict somebody. Yes, the police were and continue to be under a lot of public scrutiny and public pressure to secure arrest. However, early arrest doesn't necessarily mean that it will lead to convictions. The police have a couple of things that determine their road going forward when they pursue an investigation. One, they need to find credible and uncontaminated evidence, and that starts by how they manage the crime scene, the reliability of the witnesses, and whatever they've been told can be verified. They then present this in a case document to the National Prosecuting Authority, and based on the evidence, the National Prosecuting Authority issues a warrant of arrest for somebody and or then proceeds to trial that in a public trial where the evidence are weighed. So at this time, it would be complete speculation as to say why the police and how they failed to connect the dots, if they failed so at all. What I'm sure we are all pleased about and that the family is pleased about is that 5 arrests have been made. We assume that that was done on the basis of the evidence that they have, and that evidence was led by the National Prosecuting Authority, as said by the Minister, and that this case is now finally set for trial.
There was a lot of back and forth since the killing of Senzo Meyiwa, some leads not leading to any sort of arrest. How do police deal with such cases when you think you're going one direction, you get there and you find that there's been misinformation and that you've been misled? How is that dealt with, and how does that then affect the case moving forward?
All leads are pursued, and not all leads are necessarily credible, and not all leads necessarily lead to the conviction of a person either acting by themselves or in consort with others. All that does, it slows a case down. However, the mantra for any investigation is to go slow, to go fast. Get it right at the beginning, and as I said, it starts with the crime scene and questioning of witnesses. Witness testimony and memory will fade over time. Often, however, as police pursue one set of leads and question certain individuals, more and other evidence become available. And the weight of the evidence then leads them in a particular direction which they pursue, and then they seek conviction based on the weight of the evidence in front of them. But there's no such thing as a speedy investigation that leads to a speedy conviction unless it's very clear, and often that comes with the weight of DNA or other evidence that cannot be refuted, and or a credible confession by somebody and or witness testimony that leads to conviction.
I'd be quite keen to have your comment and insight on this. South Africans are at this point now lauding Minister Bheki Cele for the work that he has done, and saying that the previous ministers, Minister Nathi Mthethwa, Minister Fikile Mbalula, when they at the time were heading up the portfolio, didn't seem to make as much progress. If you could perhaps just talk to us through the dynamics of what looks like a relay race between ministers when one comes into office and the other one moves to another department, and the possible role that all of these ministers could have played to the outcome that we are seeing today.
you've got to remember that the accounting officer for the South African Police Service is the National Commissioner and his or her team of senior managers and senior police commanders. Each case is assigned to a senior detective. In this case, it would have been because, yes, as you rightly say, there's political and public scrutiny. The only role that any minister has oversight and to enable the police to do the best job possible. No minister undertakes the investigation. Ministers can ask questions about the investigation, but ultimately it's driven and led by the South African police, who have the sole jurisdiction to actually account for their successes. The minister, him or herself, can simply sit with senior managers and make sure that they provide the best support possible. At the time of any other previous minister, the only thing we could hope for them at the time is that the evidence wasn't there to convict or arrest or seek to pursue an investigation against any one or group of persons because it wasn't there. Now it's there, and I think we should start from that basis and say, what now does the police do together with the National Prosecuting Authority to secure conviction? Any arrest is not a conviction. I think the family and all of us would say, thank you for finally arresting somebody. We hope it was done on the basis of evidence, credible evidence that can stand up in court in front of a judge, and that in the end, there would be sentencing based on this evidence, and that sentencing would carry our aspirations that we see that justice is seen to be done.
This case, since the past 6 years, has gone from the SAPS to the Hawks, then back to the SAPS, and then to the cold case unit. If you could explain to us exactly what happens at these different stations and why it would have been passed, from one agency to another.
Well, any investigation is undertaken primarily by the detectives who are first on the scene. Often it's detectives at a local police station. They then secure the scene, look at the evidence, and then if there's enough public and political significance, and it's seen to be a serious crime due to the heinous nature of the crime, it's given over to a team of detectives who work together with the National Prosecuting Authority. Hence, given the political spotlight and the public spotlight on this, and I'm sure Senzo's family would have said that any case would deserve a similar amount of treatment, that they were not special at all. This was then handed to the Hawks because they are the serious investigation crime. However, they receive a case docket. Now, what we can say is that often it depends on the weight of that and the veracity of that case docket. Evidence is often lost. Things are lost in translation when you hand it over to the other person. They may find, hopefully they look at it with a fresh eye, they see new leads that haven't been followed through, and then eventually, once that case is prepared, it then gets handed over to the National Prosecuting Authority. This seems to be a fairly natural case flow and case management. There's nothing unusual about it. The only difficulty is that we hope that in handing it from one set of detectives to the other, or investigators to the other, that no evidence was contaminated, corrupted, or lost in the process, and that the case docket, the integrity thereof, and the investigation actually will hold scrutiny in court.
Now, in 2018, this case was considered a cold case. Give us a definition of what exactly is a cold case and what ought to be in place for a case to be considered as such.
Well, a case is deemed to be cold when the investigators, and in this case, the South African police and the detectives, have deemed that they've pursued all plausible and credible leads, and they found that there was no evidence to pursue a further investigation and or seek to hold any one person or group of people accountable. No case, even if it's cold, and especially if it's of a serious nature, is forgotten. Cases are periodically should be reviewed, and then as new evidence emerge, whether that's new DNA evidence, and in this case, we hope that there's enough public and sufficient pressure from all of us on the police to say, we now need that DNA register, we need the fingerprint register, we need a firearms register. And the integrity of those registers must be above question. So as new DNA becomes available, as new evidence becomes available, we can compare it. And as you said earlier, we can then start connecting the dots. And often pursuing one investigation leads to evidence and or an understanding of another case and or an individual that may have been complicit in a previous case. And that's how cold cases often become revived based on new evidence as it becomes available over time.
So if you could just put this into perspective for us, Mr. de Klerk, we heard the Minister there just lauding the work of the cold case unit, that it was revived, the specialized units, the fact that there are only 4 people in this unit, but in a short period of time they have handled 100 cases, they've made 40 arrests. My question is, how do these units work and which cases qualify to be part of these specialized units?
Well, again, it depends. Yeah, the cold case unit will look at cold cases that have been put, as you say, after a number of years of investigation, they have been deemed to be no further leads and it's not leading anywhere. That get handed to the cold case unit. In time, they will review the case and the investigation itself, a pair of fresh eyes, questions. They will test DNA. They may go and revisit the crime scene. They may go revisit witnesses. And then they also start to understand how one set of circumstances may have that we know now, how evidence we know now could be used in a previous case. So it is true that all police departments across the world have a cold case unit where they review and periodically review cases based on new evidence that emerges today. And often those evidence can simply be, I arrest somebody now and 3 years later, we have to let them go because we don't have enough evidence. They get arrested or somebody else get arrested and somebody says, I worked on a previous, I committed murder with that person, so that person's testimony helps me go back to a case, and then I can then reopen the case based on the testimony of somebody I caught today that may have been a cold case of 5 years ago or 6 years ago in this case. So often leads in one fresh case that is dealing with now unlocks the possibility to revisit a cold case. So the cold case unit is there. There's the active cases the detective works all the time. And if a case is serious enough, it goes to the Directorate for Special Investigations or Ops.
Mr. de Klerk, we'll leave it at that for this afternoon. Thank you for great insight there and just the inner workings of the police services as well as these investigations. So I guess what you are saying, Mr. de Klerk, is that it's never over till it's over. There's always a bit